Good evening. Please stand as the procession is about to enter the venue. Prof license, you can come.
Good afternoon, colleagues and friends of Professor Adriaan van Niekerk. I should welcome him first, right, because you're the guest of honor tonight. Thank you very much for being here to share this moment where Adriaan is going to present his professorial inaugural address. I think that's what it's called, the technical terms. He's been a professor for a while. He's not newly minted, but of course we've had COVID. And in the first year of COVID, we didn't do any of these. And in the second year of COVID, we had a stab at doing it online, but that didn't really go down well. Because of course, you can't have the drinks and food afterwards. And at any rate, it's much better to have in-person events. Isn't it fantastic to be able to gather together in person and to look each other in the eye? I mean, nothing beats it. This is a very interesting topic that Adriaan will be speaking to tonight, data science, opportunity, or threat. I think we can all intuitively feel what the opportunities are and also what the threat may be. So Adriaan, we're looking forward to what you have to say. Normally, one of our vice rectors would also be here, but this event is taking place at the same time as another auspicious event, and that is the launching today of the Nobel in Africa. And I was fortunate enough to be able to attend that event this morning and to listen to what's going to happen after the launching of that event today at the Stellenbosch Institute of Advanced Study. And this is going to play out over the next 2 years. Interestingly, it's the first time that the Nobel organization, which is run by the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences, has ventured outside of Scandinavia. And so it's an amazing opportunity for us to launch this in Stellenbosch and in Africa. And there were representatives there from physics, from the medical sciences, from the economic sciences, and what's the other one? Chemistry. And tonight there's a grand gala dinner where the rector and the vice rectors are, and all the deans. But I'd rather be here with Adriaan tonight. I've seen too much of that rich food. I don't know about that. I've just recovered from a serious bout of gastro. And so it's great to be here with all of you tonight. And just on a last note, I'll tell a little joke thinking about the Nobel Prize. My background is in political science, That was my discipline way back before I got into academic management. I sorely miss that, by the way, teaching and research. It's just everything, you know. It's why we join up in academics. But this has its rewards as well, definitely. And tonight's one of those pleasures. But the political scientists and the economists were walking down the passage at some Ivy League university somewhere, and the political scientist asked his colleague, you know, you guys have the Nobel Prize in economics. Why doesn't political science have a prize? You know, it's just not fair. And his colleague looked at him and he said, yeah, but you already have a prize. He says, what do you mean? He says, yeah, there's a Nobel Prize in literature. Meaning political science is not much of a science. But I'm going to hand over to someone who is, in a moment, after Ronnie does the introduction, and that is Adriaan. So we're looking forward to listening to what he has to say. And but before he starts, I'd like to ask Professor Ronnie Donaldson, who's the chair of the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, to come up and to introduce Adriaan. Thanks, Ronnie.
Goeienaand, so namens die Departement Geografie en Omgewingsstudie, hartelijk welkom aan al Adriaan se familie en vriende en collega's wat hier teenwoordig is vanaand. Ons bly julle kon almal hier so wees. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and friend, but also my arch enemy, but luckily only on the squash court. Mind you, our weekly Tuesday and Thursday squash event has been severely impacted by tonight's event. Adriaan is a boykie from Clifton, where he grew up and went to school at Jan van Riebeeck. After matric, he enrolled at the then Cape Technikon for a course in graphic design, and he opted out of it and enlisted for 2 years of national service. In his 20s, he was a rocker, playing bass guitar in a band called Magic Fish, which is also very ironic because Adriaan cannot stand the smell of fish or even eat it. The phrase part of the wooden furniture aptly describes his association with the department. 32 years ago, in 1991, he enrolled at Stellenbosch University for a degree in computer science and geography as majors. 6 years later, in 1997, he was appointed as a lecturer in the department, gradually making his way up to the position he now holds. Adriaan has played a leading role in establishing and driving the GIT, the Geographic Information Technology program in the department. He has turned the Center for Geographical Analysis into a money spinner, earning the university millions of rands through third stream contract work. The center is now an employment incubator and platform for our young graduates to launch a career in GIT. Some of them are here tonight. Adriaan is a prolific researcher and has to date published 85 peer-reviewed publications, 1 atlas book, and has patented 2 GIT-related things, which I do not know about, and he will probably talk to us about that now. To date, he has supervised 40 masters and 10 PhD candidates. He is nationally recognized by the NRF as a C-rated scholar, and is also registered at 2 professional bodies, SACNASP and SA Geomatics Council. Now, despite all these accolades and achievements, he always remains humble. Adriaan is an extremely committed, hardworking, dedicated, trustworthy colleague, cool as a cucumber. In the 15 years that I've worked with him, I have never seen him lose his cool. His sense of humor is as dry as Chenin Blanc. But work is not everything in life. In his free time, he is a gamer. But when he gets bored with that, which happens very quickly, I would presume, he does some more academic work, because work is also his hobby, as it should be if you want to become a full professor like him. Adriaan is married to his first wife, Helen, for 19 years, and so far they have 2 boys, Simon and Isa. I hand you over to Adriaan.
Thank you, Ronnie, for that introduction. Thank you, Prof. Leysens, also for the welcoming. This is a tough crowd. I can see it now. And there are friends from the public, and there are experts in the field in the audience. So I'm going to try and do my best. The task was to provide a scientific popular rendition of the document that you might have received at the door. Now, that's impossible. Scientific and popular, it cannot be. So I'm going to really try to do my best. Usually with these presentations, it is expected that the topic should be something about the state of the discipline. So for those of you who are an academic, I will attempt to do that, and that's where the topic of data science comes in. It's quite a topical topic at the moment because of the new school for data science and computational thinking that has been that launched recently. So we're all talking about it at the moment. But I think talking only about that will be very boring for many of you. So I'm going to try and spice things up to try and explain to you what I've been up to for the last quarter of a century. Okay, so here goes. This is what I'm going to try and cover in this lecture. First, I'll try to explain the problem that I've been working on, and what the solution that we're attempting to find a solution for that, and examples of how we're doing that. And then I'll reflect a bit on that, and then I'll come back to the theme about the opportunities and threats of data science. So I'm going to do, as I always do, too many things at the same time. So let's see if I can pull it off. So first, the problem. What you see here is an aerial photograph. Doesn't matter where it is, but I'm pretty sure you can all, even a political scientist can see that there are trees in this photograph. It's the green stuff over here, and there's some water. There are some buildings down here, so a residential area. You can see there's small buildings with some gardens around it. And up there, you can even see that some of the trees have been felled recently. So it's newly growing trees. And what you can also probably see is that there's a difference in the type of trees. These trees look quite different from those ones over there. And that's because those are planted and those are natural. But you can all see this. It's intuitive just by looking at this photograph to understand and interpret this image. So the problem is how to extract information from this image automatically. If I ask you, how many houses are there in this specific area? It would be difficult for you to do that just by looking at the image at a glance. Similarly, if you would want to count all of the trees within the plantations, that will take quite a long time to do. So we need to find ways to do this automatically. One way is to, instead of counting individual trees, we delineate areas that are of the same type. So this is a delineation of a plantation. And if we know what the density of that plantation is, how many trees there are per area, we can calculate the area and then estimate how many trees there are, what the volume of the timber is in that area or in that plantation. And that's valuable because one can use that to determine how much paper we can produce from that. That's just one example of valuable information. So the problem is, how do we automatically extract that? And to be more specific, how can we automatically extract geographical information? And what I mean by that is we need to know where it is, of course, what it is, how much there is of it, so what its area is, how many there are, and also, very importantly, when the image was taken from which the information was extracted, because that gives us a timestamp of the information. So that's what remote sensing is about. Many of you have heard of the term. It's the art and science of obtaining information about an object, scene, or phenomena over a distance, this is important, without directly interacting with the intended target. You can use remote sensing for many things, including looking at or studying celestial bodies, like the moon. We're not interested in that stuff. There's plenty of things, interesting things happening right here on the Earth that we can spend time on trying to study. So this is what we're about, studying the Earth's surface and specifically using images taken from above. So I promise that's the final problem statement. Okay, so that, in a nutshell, is what Earth observation is about. When remote sensing and other geospatial tools, which I will cover just now, are used to study and monitor the Earth's surface. Now, this is a very busy slide. I'll talk you through it. Earth observation is a component of geoinformatics, which is in turn a component of geography. So that's why I'm in the geography department. It's because of that. Ronnie is a human geographer, and there are physical geographers also in the audience. So they work on other things. So Earth observation fits in there. Geoinformatics is the science and technology of collecting, processing, analyzing, and displaying geographical information. Quite a mouthful. And there are quite a few aliases for this. You can see them all there. I'm not going to read them all. I like geospatial science because it's just easier to say. They're all basically the same thing. You might have heard of GIS, Geographic Information Systems. It's not the same thing as geoinformatics. GIS is a set of tools that we use within geoinformatics. And GIS is, along with other tools like GPS and remote sensing, are the things that we work with in geoinformatics. Right, so getting back to the problem of extracting information, useful information, from remotely sensed imagery. How do we do this automatically? That's the question. New tool, data science. Data science combines mathematics and statistics, programming, etc., artificial intelligence, machine learning, and subject matter expertise to uncover insights hidden in data. And this explains it a little bit better. So it's the combination, data science is the combination of mathematics and statistics, computer science, and then this domain expertise here, which is in our case geography and Earth observation. Data science, the occupation data science has increased incredibly over the last 10 years. Between 2015 and 2019, it grew by 74%. That's a lot. And it's projected to continue to grow at a rate of 22% within the next decade, or this decade. And that is because there are huge volumes of data being collected by our phones, by our web browsing behavior, social media. All our medical data is being stored in databases, financial data, all of that stuff is now stored in databases. And the internet allowed for that. Everything's in the cloud. And data science became a thing because someone needed, or we needed people to make sense of all of this data. And it's called big data. You might have heard of that as well. Right, so although data science is more than just artificial intelligence and machine learning, that is what most people associate data science with. And I'm going to focus on machine learning specifically. So machine learning forms part of artificial intelligence. And there's now also a thing called deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning. Deep learning is just neural networks, deep neural networks. But important expert systems also forms part of artificial intelligence, and I'll explain this in more detail. Okay, so what makes machine learning different from traditional programming? In traditional programming, we code rules into a software program. And we use the software program to answer questions or to perform some tasks. So you have a computer programmer doing that. There are two different types of machine learning. The one is unsupervised machine learning, where there's no human interfering with the process. So it's just data-driven. And usually the output of that are hidden patterns in the data. And then the second type of machine learning is supervised machine learning, in which answers are provided or labels are given. I'll explain what a label is just now. And with data, rules are created. So instead of someone programming rules, an algorithm programs those rules. So essentially, what machine learning can do is program automatically. Right, oh, yes, what I wanted to say is you can combine these things also. You can, for instance, use the output, the patterns that were created with unsupervised classification as input to supervised machine learning, or even up there. All right, so this is the process of supervised machine learning, which I'm going to focus on. First, you have to collect some data, clean it up. That's usually the biggest task, to prepare the data for analysis. Train a model, test whether the model is actually working, and then improve it if necessary. So I'm going to, this might seem very abstract to you, so I'm going to explain it in a hypothetical example of fruit. Imagine I have a crate of fruit, and I need to know how many fruit there are of each type in that crate. They're all mixed together. And suppose I have a sensor that can measure the color of a fruit and the size of a fruit. I can use machine learning to help me count the number, or classify the number of fruit and count them. And I'm going to explain how to do that. From a mathematical point of view, you can put the two variables that we have, namely color and shape, which is just the ratio between the width and the height of the fruit, on a graph, which we call the feature space. So it's just a Cartesian space. Let's say the first fruit that is scanned by the machine is a banana. It's elongated, it's yellow. I will tell the machine now that this is a banana. And the next one is a lemon. And again, the shape is now less elongated, it's more round, but it's still yellow. And I'll tell it is a lemon, and I do so for an apple, a green apple, a red apple, and an orange. And you can see where they fit into this feature space. All right, let's suppose the next fruit that is scanned is another banana, but it's a bit fatter and shorter than the previous one. The machine, because it is closest in feature space to the banana that we've labeled, it will know that this is a banana because it has very similar properties, and the distance between the unknown object, the unknown fruit, is very small to the one that we've labeled. So it will classify that banana correctly as a banana. Right, and what about a green banana? It's green, but because it's close to feature space to that previous banana, it will classify it correctly as a banana. What if we give there's a tomato that is scanned? The machine has never seen the tomato before, but because it is round and it's red, it's likely going to classify it as an apple. Unless, of course, you now see that it made an error, and you rectify it by labeling that as a tomato, and then it will remember that it's a tomato. Isn't that amazing? All right, let's get back. Why am I saying this? Let's get back to the real problem. You can do the same thing with geography. Label things on the Earth's surface, on that photograph, as being a plantation, and add some more samples for plantation. Do that for natural forests. Do that for water. Do that for, I've just put all of the other things in another class called other. And then you can compare that information with some variables that you've extracted from that same image. So this is hue, which is color, but it's scaled just numbers. And this is roughness, texture, which is also extracted from that image. The value between 0 and 1. You can put that in the same manner as the fruit. You put it in feature space and extract all this information into feature space. And then this is what it might look like. Water is blue and smooth. Buildings are rough, or urban areas are rough. Plantations are all green, of course, but they differ in terms of roughness. You get the idea. You throw that into an algorithm like nearest neighbor. That's the one that I've just demonstrated with the fruit. Forgot to say that. Nearest neighbor classification. And you apply that model back onto your data, all of your data that hasn't been labeled yet. So if there's a pixel that hasn't been labeled, it falls over there, it has those properties of that position, it's going to be classified as being plantation. Right, in that way you label all of your pixels, and the output is this. Isn't that amazing? Automatically mapped all of those pixels. There are thousands of pixels in there, but the machine mapped each one of those. Yes, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And remember that only 2 variables were used, hue and texture. Right, so here's just a comparison to the original. Okay, so if you find errors, you can improve this, the model, by adding more samples or adding more variables. And I'll show that later. The point is that machine learning is a fantastic new technology to automatically extract useful geographical information from images. Now, I see Larry over there, Professor Zitzman. Adriaan, that stuff is old, man. We did this way back. Here are some examples. 1972, machine learning was used by these guys for analyzing imagery. It's because of this, the first launch of the first Earth observation satellite in 1972. Landsat 1, or ERTS. Digital images, 4 bands, red, green, blue, and then infrared, 16-meter resolution, global coverage every 18 days. That's a lot of images to interpret manually. They had to find a solution to do this automatically. How to deal with this very, very big data. Very, very, very big data. Way bigger than what we have today, by the way, in the web, whatever. But the worst is that several additional Earth observation satellites were launched right thereafter in the 80s, 70s and 80s. So it just exploded the amount of the volume of data that needed to be interpreted. So we at this university also did work on this, and Prof. Zitzman, sitting over there, wrote this paper about the classification of vineyards in the Western Cape using Landsat digital image processing. And soon thereafter, him and Flokkie, Mr. Flok, wrote this paper, Digital Analysis of Satellite Imagery, the Art or a Science. So we've been doing this stuff, or Larry has been doing this stuff for a very long time. I started doing this in 1995 when I did my honors project. Larry was one of my supervisors, where I mapped the land cover in the Coles River catchment. And supervised classification or machine learning was so established at that time that I afforded it 3 sentences in my entire project of 6,500 words. 3 sentences I said, I did this, I did that, done. Everybody knew about machine learning back then. It was a pretty standard procedure. It was a means to an end, and this end here was an input to a hydrological model to determine runoff, rate of runoff. Don't look at my poor map. Very embarrassed. Okay. Right, so let's talk about what happened after. So because supervised classification or machine learning was so established and old by then, we started doing other types of research in the 2000s. One of the biggest things we worked on was object versus per pixel. So the problem is you see all this noise in this output. We call this the salt and pepper effect. There are pixels in there that are other, there are pixels in there that are in this compartment, for instance, that is indigenous forest or natural forest. So there's a mixture of things, and we don't like that. You can group the pixels together, all the pixels that are similar, group them together into objects using image segmentation. It's the blue lines here. So all of these things become polygons, and that you use in the classification instead of the individual pixels. That's the output of that. The same model that I trained on those pixels, I just applied on the objects. Yes, it does make some errors, but it is a much more consistent output. I should also say that I added a few bands here to just make it a little bit better. So this is also nearest neighbor classification. I must say, also mention that nearest neighbor classification is the most basic machine learning algorithm out there. So there are more powerful ones, but I'm using this to demonstrate the concepts. Okay, so just a comparison between the two. Pixel-based or object-based was a real big research focus in the early 2000s. The thing is, if you improve the segmentation had an impact on the classification. So a lot of work was about improving just the segmentation part of things. So you see there, in the compartment there, that it's a much better delineation of that compartment. And it takes some doing to get it that way. And if you apply that, and you added some additional variables also, you get this near perfect result. So that was GeoBIA, Geographical Object-Based Image Analysis. The other thing we worked on is knowledge-based or expert system approach versus machine learning. And expert systems is a little bit different in that it's similar to normal programming, where you have an expert who come up with rules on how to interpret. So usually it kind of takes, it mimics how a human would interpret an image and put those things into rules. And then a non-expert can query that data or produce a map based on those rules. And this is what a typical rule set might look like. I created this rule set in 10 minutes to do the same thing that I just demonstrated. So using brightness, texture, and hue, color. And if it's high, it's like if the brightness is high, it's like the other. If the texture is high, it's like the tree. So if it's dark and the texture is high, it's like the tree. And if it's green, Depending on if it's a lot of green or less green, it's either planted forest or natural woody forest. And if I apply those rules on that same image, just using hue, texture, and brightness, that is produced. It has some errors in there, but it's pretty close to reality. Just for comparison, that was the machine learning output with a lot more data, and that is the rule set approach. This was created without any samples, so that's the major difference. You don't need any samples. Collecting samples is a very costly exercise, tedious exercise, especially if I have to do this at a national scale. Right, here's some examples of research done in the department in the 2000s. And Garth sitting over there, and Theo up there. That's Theo Poe and Garth Stevenson, their thesis. And I myself used object-based, expert system, knowledge-based approach for my own PhD to develop a suitability analysis web application through which one could identify areas that are suitable for perennial crops in this case. So expert systems was a big thing in the 2000s. In the 2010s, machine learning became popular again because it was gaining traction in other fields. The web and all those things people started using machine learning for other applications. So also the machine learning algorithms improved, and more importantly, the rule sets are created by experts, and that is valuable intellectual property, and experts weren't willing to share it with other people and to publish it. And even if you do publish it, and we've tried, no one wants to publish it because it's an art form. What do you base it on? How can you explain how you got to a specific rule set? Well, it's really difficult. I suppose you can, but it's really difficult. All right, so in an era of publish or perish in the academic world, instead of fighting it, we joined the club and started doing research on using machine learning for Earth observation tasks. So here's just support vector machines for Cape thicket mapping, nearest neighbor for land cover, vegetation mapping in Australia, land cover, health, plant health monitoring, salt accumulation. So salt accumulating in soils is a big problem, can lead to loss of arable land. So the Water Research Commission commissioned us to do a lot of research on this, and we did a lot of experiments with machine learning and all kinds of studying what affects the accuracy in most cases. So those are all about that. Point is, what did we learn? Machine learning works, but the accuracy depends on the application, how difficult the task is, of course, the number of training samples that you provide and the quality thereof, the configuration of the balance of the training samples, how representative they are. So a lot of things about training samples that can affect it, the quality of the segmentation that I've just shown, what predictive variables, how many predictive variables you give it, and which ones you use, quality and relevance of those predictive variables, the algorithm that you employ, and the parameters that you use in that algorithm has an effect. And then the target classes, how many target classes are there? It's much easier to classify a binary thing, like 2 classes versus 50 classes. And the complexity of that. Typically, all of this research that we've done in the last decade, in all of them, we use different configurations of machine learning until we establish a good result. But due to the expense in collecting all these samples, a large set of training data, which is expensive, or rather time-consuming. Good models were only built on small sets of data in particular areas. The models tended to overfit the data, meaning that you build a model, it works perfectly in that area that I've shown you, but as soon as you apply that model in a different area, like in the Western Cape, instead of that was in KwaZulu-Natal, it totally fails. So what's the value in that? It means that you have to collect samples everywhere. And then the outputs were, in many cases, inconsistent and produced unrealistic results in many cases. So often, knowledge-based or expert system approaches performed better than the machine learning approaches did for real-world, operational, big areas applications. So not case study-based. Okay, some examples, a lot of text. Okay, here are some pretty pictures. Right, here is a map of a land cover map that we produced at the CGA for a large part of the Eastern Cape at 2.5 meter resolution. We used spot 5 imagery. We tested machine learning. I think we collected almost 10,000 samples, and we used different machine learning algorithms, and it didn't work. In the end, what worked, and this was a contract for government, we had to produce something within, I think it was 3 months or something, crazy. The best result was a knowledge-based approach. So machine learning didn't work. For salt accumulation, like I explained just now, it was a big project. We tried many, many things. Very high resolution satellite imagery, many different machine learning classifiers, spot 5 imagery on different irrigation schemes to try and identify these areas that are salt affected. And here the training data was soil samples. So someone had to go out there, dig a hole, get those soil samples to a lab, analyze it for the salt content, and then we used it in the model with remotely sensed imagery. So it's very, very expensive to do that on a large scale. So we collected many samples in the specific areas, but it was still not enough to produce a good machine learning result. What did work was a good old knowledge-based expert system approach where we used, again, the segmentation, identified anomalies within each field, which we called vrotkolle. And if that vrotkoll happens over an extensive period of time, so a year, it's unlikely that those anomalies would be the result of a farming practice, so poor irrigation or a pest or something that the farmer did. It's most likely something to do with the soil. And we visited 9 irrigation schemes throughout the country, collected lots of samples in those fields, and found that in most cases, those anomalies were related to salt accumulation. And you can see these are values of salt accumulation within the soil, or EC values, electroconductivity values. This worked so well that we developed a web application, or we operationalized this as a web application at the CGA for the Water Research Commission again. Okay, another example. At JuiceMart, which is a spin-out company of this university, we are interested in mapping relationships between different phenomena on the Earth's surface, and we do that by transforming those aerial photographs that I showed earlier into 3D models. And the output of that, obviously you have elevation of everything, but the output is a digital surface model that gives you the height of the intersection between the atmosphere and objects on the Earth's surface and the Earth's surface itself. So digital surface models are great, but in many cases you want to remove those objects on the Earth's surface to produce a digital terrain model, which is just that bottom line. And we tried machine learning for this, and machine learning failed. What worked was a knowledge expert system approach. Another example where it failed. It worked. Machine learning worked here. In this project where we had to map all the irrigated areas in the country and determine the water use of irrigation in South Africa, or water used for irrigation. But we had to break the country into 9 areas of similar rainfall regions. So those are the 9 areas over there, and we collected samples in each of those 9 areas, and built a machine model within each area and applied that to produce that map of irrigated areas, which is the blue stuff is the irrigated, the red is the rain-fed agriculture. And based on that, we could determine the total water use, but also the water use per crop type. So this is an example of water use between irrigated, can't remember what that is, it's irrigated something, and rain-fed. But the point is, machine learning worked in this case. Machine learning is also working in this application. It's also a spin-out company from the department called Terraclim, where we use machine learning to identify field areas where specific cultivars of wine should be grown, suitable areas for a specific cultivar. And we're using like 200 variables and a lot of fields where we know what cultivar has been planted there. So we're assuming that I think it's about 6,000 field or vineyards that we use in this machine learning model. We assume that there was some logic in planting a specific cultivar in large, like overall, and then we compare those cultivars against environmental variables with a machine learning algorithm, and then through this web application, you can determine which cultivar to plant where. So it worked there. We use it for grape yield modeling. So how much grapes are produced in a specific area. We use the same database as for the suitability analysis of the previous slide for this project. It worked, machine learning worked, but only for certain cultivars, Chenin Blanc, which we know yield is related to, or where yield is an important factor, not quality, and it only worked in certain areas, so partly worked. We did the same thing similar thing for apple yield modeling, where we compared drone images, 50 centimeter satellite images, 10-meter Sentinel-2 images, lots of them, and lots of in situ data collected in these 3 orchards in Grabo. We tried to do many things here, to compare, use machine learning to model many things. But the thing that worked in the end was fruit size. We could determine or model fruit size as early as the 6th of December to 2.5 millimeters accuracy. So here it worked, but it didn't work for many of the variables. We're currently busy with an indigenous forest mapping project where we have to map all of the indigenous forests in South Africa because we want to determine the water use of these forests to compare it to planted forests. And also, of course, it's useful to know where these things are so that we can, in 10 years' time, compare how things have changed to see if there's any deforestation, and it's also very useful for carbon stock estimations. Machine learning worked, but it required a lot of samples, and if we do this for the whole of the country, we would need almost 2 million samples to be collected by someone, which is going to take a very long time. And we don't have time. So we're using also deep learning for the same problem, convolutional neural networks. And even for that, we had to collect many more samples. And it worked in some areas, and it didn't work in other areas. And we also studied whether the parameters used for this algorithm made a difference, and it did. I'm not going to show all the results, but the thing that had the biggest influence on accuracy is the order in which the samples were inputted into the algorithm. So we randomized the samples, and if you randomize it a few times, every time there's a different output, and the accuracies differ quite substantially. So what you need most for machine learning is luck. Okay, so I'm going to stop with these examples soon. Here, for this project, we found that a knowledge-based approach is working best, but we're still busy with that project. We need to finish that before the end of November. Okay, so this is the main issue of using machine learning, and even worse, deep learning, for geographical problems. There's too much variation. You need so many more samples to accommodate that variation. And we are collecting samples, but we're there. If we have many more samples, like in other fields like web applications of mapping, of searching for cats or whatever, there are lots of those things. People are putting those things on social media all the time. So look how pretty my cat is. And then it goes into a machine learning algorithm. So that's why it's so accurate. So now I'm going to get to the discipline side of things. Data science, opportunity or threat. From a singularity perspective. That means the point in time at which technology, AI or robots, growth becomes uncontrollable, irreversible, resulting in unforeseen changes to human civilization. Doom and gloom. We're not close to that yet. Not in geospatial science, at least. We're at it for 50 years already. 1972, 2022. A lot of time, and we still don't have all the solutions. So it's unlikely, maybe in other fields, but not in geospatial science. From a research perspective, it has been really great to do research in machine learning. You just put machine learning in your title and you get lots of citations. And I've benefited from it. And there are infinite applications, and there are infinite number of combinations of different algorithms, different areas, different applications, different data sets. You can really go on forever, and of course it's really cool to do this. So that's why we're doing it. But most research is based on limited data sets, case study based, and it's not other people's research, my own research, or our research, my students and my research, is most of them are case by case study, and it's really difficult to prove that they will work elsewhere, although we're trying. The biggest problem is black box. We don't know what's going on. Nearest neighbor is still easy to understand, but there are very, very complex models out there, and you don't know why a certain thing is working or not working. You just throw stuff at it until it works. So there's no transparency. You're not really learning anything from that. There's a lack of understanding and also traceability or accountability. Let's say a machine learning algorithm gives you an output and it's wrong. Are you going to say it's the machine's fault? That's a big problem, accountability. If it's a human doing it, then you can point to a person and say, you made an error. Biggest problem for science in general is this hit and miss approach to science that we are taking with machine learning specifically. We try things until it works. I don't think that's a sensible way of scientific discovery. And what about the theory? We used to have theories, then we would test theories. We'd first try and understand something, come up with a theory, and then try to prove the theory. But that has been lost somewhere. Well, not in all research, I'm generalizing. Okay, so from a real world perspective, I'm questioning what is the value of my own research on machine learning, the real value. We must be realistic about what can be achieved with machine learning. Currently, the industry, and I'm working mostly in the agricultural industry, is overwhelmed with all this technology. They're confused and frustrated with these so-called solutions. And scientists must be in tune with what's going on in the industry and what it needs. And the best way to measure the impact of a so-called solution is whether it could provide useful answers, and most importantly, is it cost-effective? Will someone pay for it? And more importantly, will someone pay for it again? Because then you know it's actually has value. So that's why I strongly believe that technology transfer in universities such as this one is really critical, and that means doing applied research like we're doing at the CGA, but also through the spin-out companies that the university, there are now 30 spin-out companies in the university, 2 of which I'm happy to say I'm involved in, and thanks to Professor Leysens for allowing me to do this stuff. But I think that is the way to go, to make sure that what we are doing is of value. From a disciplinary side of things, we've been doing this for a very long time. Geospatial scientists have played a pioneering role in machine learning. I think we're special scientists, special spatial scientists, or geodata scientists. And if you look at this diagram again, I think we have a very niche role to play in data science because we're more focused on the geospatial side of things. And it's really important that we do a good job at that. All right, and finishing off, perception is everything. Data science is the new kid on the block. There's a lot of expectations about what it can produce, and it's a growing field, and increasingly data scientists are working on work that has a geospatial component, and the concern could be that this poses a threat to geography or geospatial science. But geography have seen a lot of these things happen in the past, and I don't think it is a threat. In fact, I think it is an opportunity for geography and geospatial science specifically to, because we've been working on this so long, I think it is a good opportunity for us to work together with pure data scientists to come up with solutions. There are too many problems to fix. So we can't do it alone. Yes, there's a hype around data science, but we should get onto the bandwagon and join that hype. And more importantly, let's collaborate with other geodata scientists to produce answers and solutions to the many, many problems that we are facing relating to the environment, climate, poverty, energy, which all have a geospatial component. And as long as we as geospatial scientists produce solutions that are valuable, that people actually use, we will remain part of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Goed, ter afsluiting, baie dankie Adriaan. Wil jy? Oh, you're supposed to respond. Oh.
But you can continue. Do you want to?
I didn't get that note.
You're saving me from having to be very difficult. Well, Adriaan, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to be responding as a social scientist, and I'm going to start by saying I can actually understand aerial photography because in a previous life, I was a trained photo interpreter in the Air Force. Yeah, so in those days we used to put them together, and we had these stereoscopes, that we used to analyze. But we weren't looking for trees and stuff and grapes and things. And no. And that just goes right to what struck me about how you concluded, if I can start with that. If it's, and going to the threat or opportunity, if it's valuable, if the application of this technology, whether it be, and that was interesting for me, I thought machine learning is just wonderful, it does everything. But you very clearly illustrated here how it doesn't. And that data, you called it knowledge-based application has to come into it as well. And when you have the opportunity to take samples, it just, it makes things more robust. And that struck me. I sort of thought, as a layperson looking at it, that machine learning was infallible. And the other thing that struck me from your presentation is that machine learning takes the human out. Your example of the fruit, let's say that was in a crate. If we have to assess the quality of a crate of fruit, when the harvest is coming in, and it's all done by a scanner. The crate comes past, the scanner just picks up on the size, on the ripeness, on the quality, the color, and so on, and that's it, and so on. It takes the human out of that process. And one of the things that is often said about machine learning and artificial intelligence, of course, is that it displaces the human. In other words, it takes out lower components of labor in whatever it may be. But particularly in agriculture, I would imagine. But of course, we know that agriculture is so highly modernized in the rest of the world. In the United States, the way they farm and also using high-tech remote sensing, using tractors that can do everything. You can even make a whiskey, Adriaan, in those tractors. It takes out the labor component, but they still need seasonal harvesters to come in, actually also from South Africa to assist them. I was really struck by how useful this technology is and how indeed valuable it is in an area which is so important, farming and food security, and ensuring that we have optimal knowledge of what we need to do, where we need to plant and so on. There was a lot of stuff I didn't understand, of course, but I think you managed to bring across the value of what you're doing and to interrogate your own discipline. It was very interesting to me that the very thing you pointed to was mentioned this morning as well at the Nobel in Africa, where the 4 people who are going to be driving the seminars over the next 2 years, and they're going to all universities in South Africa. It's not going to be hogged by Stellenbosch and Steers. They're going all over the country to share the knowledge. And all of them are focusing on a specific problem. But the one person, and he was a Scandinavian guy, I forget the name now, said that the old way of doing things, well, even I understand as a political scientist, we used to do this. There's a theory, and I was a quantitative political scientist as well. There's a theory, there's a hypothesis, So you go and test it. You know, you can go and test it in surveys that are done, samples, nationally representative samples. You can go and ask people, you know, what they think about democracy, whether they believe whether they have trust in the police, for instance, in the people that are supposed to. By the way, the trust in the police in this country is very, very low. In the nationally representative sample, it came down to 30% of people thought that our police services could be trusted to maintain law and order. That's a very low level of legitimacy. But that's theory, that's hypothesis. You can have a theory about democracy is consolidated. You can have theories in your field. But the point that he made, that there's a move away from that to data-driven patterns that are discovered and conclusions that are reached and that are driven solely by data. And he mentioned that the data, and I'd never seen this before, the amount of data in the world today is something like 200 Z. It was a Z something. What is that? Z. It wasn't terabyte, it wasn't trillion byte, it was they used a Z. That's the amount of data, an enormous amount of data on all these things that you mentioned. I really was struck by the usefulness of everything, but I was also struck by a couple of words that we used here and there. Luck came into I think when it came to the machine learning setting of parameters or something used, well, sometimes, you know, there's also luck involved. There's a hunch, there's an intuition, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's also part of the discovery process in science. But I also sat there and I couldn't, as a political scientist, thinking about how, if one can do something like this, which with such great accuracy, then you can do other things which aren't so good, also with great accuracy. And here I'm talking about surveillance, for instance, you know. Because we all know that, you know, if I step outside here and I open this book and I look at my notes and I check, was I talking nonsense just now when I was in there, and actually did I get it together? Then somebody watching somewhere else in the world with the technology from high above can read it with me, you know, easily. So that surveillance aspect of things, I agree with you, we're far from the Terminator thing. That's of course always the one that to uphold, you know, in terms of the dangers. I agree with you, I don't think we're there. You said, but you did say maybe in other fields. Do you have any in mind? Or
Robotics.
Robotics. Well, there you go. All right. So there is that thread. I mean, the things they can do in biomedicine, you know, they can do an operation of removing an appendix totally through robotics, completely. I do hope somebody's watching while that happens. You know, I wouldn't be lying on the slab when that's being done, and even some more intricate operations than that. Yeah, finally, two scary things from this morning was one of the guys showed the picture of 4 people that he said, you know, these were my research assistants on this project I was doing on artificial intelligence. And then he stopped and he says, you know, they could be any people, there were 2 women, 2 men, they could be any people from anywhere, couldn't they? You could recognize them in the street. He says they don't exist. They were generated through artificial intelligence that compared thousands of pictures and created them according to an algorithm, but they looked like photographs of people. You know, and as we know as well, we can make President Vladimir Zelensky speak and make him say things, you know, that he's not saying at all through fake information. But the big one that really scared me this morning, they showed a video called The Silent Pandemic. And that pandemic, we've just had one, but it was a very visible one, right? Because we all had to hide and we had to wear masks. And wasn't it strange? The first time you could walk around without one, I felt like I wasn't properly dressed, kind of thing. But that was a very visible pandemic. But the silent pandemic, which is about to take on very, very serious proportions, is the one where our resistance, the bacterial resistance inside us against antibiotics is picking up more and more and more. So in 1987 was the last time they could develop new antibiotics to stop that resistance. And we know that antibiotics date back from about 1945 or so, and have saved countless of lives, infections. And the doomsday scenario is that if there's no large investment in that, in developing a counter to that resistance, then we are facing as humanity a situation where we could succumb to very basic infections that are now treatable. So watch the video. It's quite a shocking one. It's called The Silent Pandemic. It's on YouTube. I went to watch it again. I was shocked second time over as well. So, Adriaan, thank you very much indeed. I came away with a lot of things to think about. I think the work you're doing is just absolutely for the good, it's an example of science for the good. I think you managed to convey or to profess, because this is what it's about. You're supposed to profess today as a professor what it is that you're doing. And I think you managed to do that both in terms of the nitty-gritty in a way that can be understood by a lay person, but also in broad brushstrokes about what your discipline is about, but most of all, how it is used for the betterment of one can say, of humanity. What a huge impact it makes on something like food security and agricultural productivity. So thank you very much, Adriaan. Well done. I think we all enjoyed it. And now, Professor Donaldson may come and do the closing prayers.
Sorry for jumping the gun, Tony. I must say, Tony, I'm very impressed with your note-taking skills, and thank you very much for the nice commentary that you've just given. I think we must try and see if when Tony retires in 2 years' time, if we can get him into our honours program through the RPL route to do honours with us. So thanks for that, Tony. Adriaan, yes, thank you. I can echo what Tony just said. For a lovely presentation, for making all of us understand what you're doing, because after 15 years, like I said, I still don't know what you do. But I have some more or less a better understanding of what you do and what your unit are capable of and the achievements that you have and your achievements. And then lastly, again, just thank you very much for everybody that has come out here tonight, and also some people online. I know Hannes van der Merwe is also attending the session tonight online. So thank you for your time, and then thanks very much, Tony, for sponsoring the drinks and the eats outside. So on behalf of the Dean, I invite you now to enjoy that with us and Adriaan afterwards. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Task to be performed. Professor van Niekerk just has to join me up front here, where I will officially hand over this kokertjie. What do you call this thing? What? I don't know. A scroll.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I do another speech?
Is that what you can hear? That's an awful.
You can try.